revered franchise would have left so long will you become a series that everyone hates. More poison until you absolutely can't forget what happened. Don't ever forget what happened. That should do covers to see other Everyone is going to start talking about this exactly 1 year from now, but I think we need to talk about this now.
I love the Dead Space franchise. It was easily my favorite game of the 7th console generation. So why do I say it needed to die? Because that's just it. It died early and avoided the horrible fate of so many franchises that have came before and after it. Dead Space was created by Visceral Games at the behest of EA Games, trying to at least look like the company it used to be before realizing that owning the licensing rights to sports games was pretty much cashing a check for millions and millions of dollars every year, and they were told to go wild. And that's just what they did. Dead Space scratched that itch a lot of us didn't know we had until Resident Evil 4 came out for a perfect blend of action and horror. And then once it knew that we were sucked in, it kept us immersed in the world where everything was so perfectly integrated into the world and then into the game. Every single little feature. So let's take a look at the Dead Space games and then take a look at why Dead Space's death needed to happen. I suppose we should start not even at the first Dead Space game, but at the progenitor of Dead Space, Resident Evil 4. It's really obvious if you look at the games side by side and then look at the timings of the games. Resident Evil 4 had just came out in early 2005, while presumably Dead Space was in development, and then Dead Space itself came out almost 4 years after Resident Evil 4, which would be just enough time to radically redesign a game or change its direction to emulate something that had been so successful and rocking the world of gaming. For those of you that don't remember when Resident Evil 4 came out, it really did blow everyone's minds. No one had ever seen something like that, or at least seen it done that well. And as far as emulating the basic gameplay style of Resident Evil 4, Dead Space did a really good job while staying true to its own nature and just not being an overt ripoff. Where Dead Space really shone, though, was in its story direction, not necessarily for the story itself, but being a sharp contrast to Resident Evil 4's wacky zombie adventures. In Resident Evil 4, you never really took it seriously. There were comments about the President's daughter's bust size. You were always finding a way to clown around, and merchant guy, I love you, even though you're pretty much a running joke. Dead Space, on the other hand, was played 100% serious with some mastery of subversion. While many people complain that Dead Space loved to just do nothing, what was really going on was Dead Space was conditioning you and then subverting your conditions. As gamers, we know to quickly pick up on how a game plays itself. In Dead Space's most frequent case, it was, if we see a vent burst, a monster is about to jump out. So what does Dead Space do? It gets us in a hallway with a dozen vents, has them all explode at once, and then just waits as we figure out what the hell just happened. Dead Space also took the time to mess with us in the plot too. Not just with the obvious thing that the chapters spell out, but in the little things. We initially think the crew was being affected by the Necromorphs virus and that the poor captain was being the victim, but in reality we learn out later on that the captain was a crazy that was spearheading this whole thing knowing what was going on, and the crew were the same people. Dead Space was just all over us in subversion and messing with our heads and making sure we knew that the marker wasn't just messing with Isaac Clarke, it was messing with us too. From the obvious subversions, like don't shoot the Necromorphs in the head, that doesn't help anything, to the more subtle ones, like when you go back and backtrack through a level, areas that were normally safe now are some of the more dangerous parts of the game. And then especially so, when we find those, I don't know what these things are, but they turn dead bodies into new Necromorphs that are of the harder variety. And after seeing them once, you go around mutilating every body you find in the game like some sort of deranged madman, on the off chance that one of those things shows up again and decides to give you a world of hurt. It hardly ever happens in the game either. Maybe 1 in 5 times you've mutilated every corpse in a room, one of those things will show up and you'll be vindicated for your actions. But Dead Space doesn't even have to do anything like explode a vent. You're already conditioned to go around mutilating bodies like some sort of loony. Dead Space was able to get us, even in subtle ways that didn't actually scare us, but just mess with our heads. Where Dead Space really excelled, though, was its immersion, which is something that was all to its own and not from Resident Evil 4's roots. Everything in Dead Space, save for the pause menu that allows you to quit the program, is all within the world of Dead Space in the USG Ishimura. Your inventory menu is an augmented reality head-up display that Isaac's engineering suit provides. Your waypoint is another augmented reality feature of Isaac's engineering suit that allows you to figure out where you're going based on where other people have put little mini waypoints. You can see other people using the video chat feature. The logs are something that someone would logically put out. Everything in the Ishimura has a reason to be there. And you don't really need to think too hard to realize that if in some strange twist of reality the Ishimura was real, it actually could support a large crew doing mining missions. You even find out later on that those lurkers aren't actually babies, but they're some sort of template clone thing that was designed for when people in heavy mining accidents lose organs and limbs. Those are just template stem organ donors so that they can just get right back into the fray. Between this wonderful sense of immersion and how Dead Space struck a balance between not too actiony but not too slow grindy horror-like, and the way that it ramped up the crazy at just the right incline up until the very end, where you're fighting some sort of Cthulhu thing and then realizing that everything has been a lie this whole time, Dead Space didn't really sell crazy well, but it amassed a cult following that, lucky for all of us, decided not to emulate the practices of unitology. Fast forward about 2 1/3 years after the honeymoon phase of Dead Space 1, which makes you question if they were almost concurrently working on Dead Space 2 at the same time, we got the sequel to Dead Space. Dead Space 2 very much leaned more towards action than horror compared to its previous game, but at the very least we still got the major elements of immersion that came from the previous one. It made sense for Isaac to be crawling around in the vents because that's his job. He's an engineer, he fixes things. The vents even recognize Isaac's rig signature and immediately open up for him, saying, yes, you very much are supposed to be here. While Dead Space 1 was a slow, very careful crawl through the many dungeons of the USG Ishimura, Dead Space 2 was a fly-by-the-seat-of-your-pants adventure through what was left of the sprawl during a full-on Necromorph outbreak, which, while not necessarily capturing the magic of the first game, it certainly helped modernize it a bit without making it feel too generic. Some of the new enemies like the Pack finally make things like the machine gun, the pulse rifle, whatever it is, useful. And, you know, I had a ball with the javelin gun. The javelin gun is one of my favorite weapons ever in a video game because it is just so satisfying to use. Also, massive props to Visceral for making anti-gravity sessions go from boring and annoying to just all sorts of fun. Dead Space 2, however, unfortunately very much bears the signs that EA was already over that whole let's get people to respect us thing. It has the very obvious tacked on, oh, pre-order bonuses, never mind if that, yeah, that might break your immersion, but pre-order it anyway. And then the tacked on multiplayer that all of nobody played, although I'm sure it would have been fun. It's just nobody comes to a single-player adventure game like Dead Space looking for some generic multiplayers type game. We just want the story, thank you very much, and we'll download something else if we want to play a multiplayer set in the world of Dead Space. And then there was the issue of where Dead Space the first was inspired by Resident Evil 4, Dead Space 2 overtly copies Resident Evil 4. This is especially present in certain sections of the game, and that the DLC for Dead Space 2 is effectively Assignment Ada in space. Dead Space 2 tried to make an earnest effort in exploiting the conditioning that we had left over from Dead Space 1, but it kind of falls flat on its face because they start incentivizing things. The best example of this is the whole thing about mutilating bodies just in case one of those conversion monsters shows up. If that's the way we get loot from dead bodies, by doing a bit of overkill, by running around and smashing all of them in order to save ammo, it's really not having the same effect as the previous game, because now we're doing it because we know there are prizes inside, and not because, oh god, there's like a slim chance that one of those things is going to show up and we're going to be in a world of hurt. Given the way the first Dead Space game ended, there really was a sort of, maybe it's open-ended, maybe this is the actual end feeling, so that if Visceral wanted, it could have just left it there. But we got Dead Space 2 anyway, because every publisher wants its pound of flesh, and then another one every 4 years for the rest of eternity. While it was nice that we got to see what happened after that, and the game was thoroughly modernized to the point of where it was a lot easier to play in some respects and looked a lot better, it was certainly a step down, but still a good game. Wasn't as good as the first one, but it was passable. It was nice to learn a bit more about the world in which Isaac Clarke, the USG Ishimura, and these crazy space zombie things that you can't shoot in the head reside. But it came at the cost of tacked on multiplayer and pre-order bonuses that just make you silently go, ugh, when you find out there's effectively no way to make the game boot without them. At the end of the gameplay, we just kind of sighed and say, well, it was certainly something, and it could have been a lot worse. And then we went and jinxed it by saying that. Dead Space 3 was not only a critical controversy magnet, but also set up for a complete failure. Before we even get into the game itself, it's noting that the in-game transactions flying in the face of Dead Space's famous sense of immersion was one of the worst things anyone was talking about at the time. And while this game reviewed highly, if you go back and look through some of those reviews, it almost feels as if they were being slapped around by EA to give it a high score and not focus on the huge glaring issues that make this not a Dead Space game, but just some generic buddy shooter, cover-high, chest-high wall extravaganza that happens to take place in the Dead Space universe. Okay, so I know this is already long, but stop the video. We gotta add something else real quick. I originally was just BSing about that. Like, I didn't have any evidence to back it up, and I was assuming that I'd have to cut this part out because I was wrong. Well, I went back and looked at all the major news sites that reviewed the Dead Space 3 abomination. And it was uncanny. The only people that brought up, like, not even, like, talked about, but so much as brought up the microtransaction issues were Jim Sterling of, at the time, Destructoid, and a Mr., let me see here, Brad Shoemaker of Giant Bomb. Everyone else just completely avoided the subject of Dead Space 3's single-player or co-op microtransactions. In fact, some of these reviews are just the most awful things ever. Particularly, let me find, where is it here? Oh yes, IGN. IGN is my personal favorite of all these terrible reviews, because IGN's review here by, I don't even want to give this person any publication or shoutouts, it reads like the video game equivalent of a book report. In fact, I almost feel as if some of these phrases might have been marketing material, as if they were regurgitated promo reels. It just goes on. Like, let's look at, who else do I have bookmarked here? Oh, yeah, GameSpot, that ought to be fun. You know, GameSpot isn't too bad. It's alarming how much of this stuff was regurgitated press blurbs and how they all dance around the very microtransactions they were having a media circus over not even a few months prior. Alright, that'll end this tangent. Let's get back to disparaging Dead Space 3 for things that are about it and not its media coverage. I intentionally avoided this game. Between absolutely needing to install EA's very controversial at the time Origin software service in order to so much as install the game, and all the bad press that this game got because of the microtransactions, I outright refused to play this game until a couple months ago when I did it purely for the purpose of research. And I went in thinking maybe it was all hyperbole at the time. Maybe this game wasn't as bad as everyone was talking about. And then I realized that everyone had the right idea because this game is such an amazing catastrophe. The first 15 minutes of this game are a testament to everything good about Dead Space being abandoned. In the previous 2 games, there was sort of a rock, paper, scissors thing going on where Isaac can defeat Necromorphs, Necromorphs can defeat military personnel, and military personnel can defeat Isaac. So naturally, you never see Isaac go up against actual unaffected human beings. What do you do in the first 15 minutes? You fight against generic zombie-type monsters, who are pretty much those guys from the House of Dead arcade cabinets with their axes and how they just mindlessly charge at you. And then, when you finally get to play as Isaac Clarke and get into this whole, oh, no time to explain, we got your girl, she's in trouble, come with us, the bad guys are already here. Oh, look. Oh. We're this now, we're doing this. Okay. Immediately, before we even get into the actual space part of Dead Space, before we even see our first Necromorph, we are slapped in the face with corporate boardroom focus testing, with garbage, with we want our own Gears of War, but we don't have time to make a new property, so this is gonna have to do. And the whole game just goes on like this. Where Dead Spaces 1 and 2 were about using unconventional weapons that were oftentimes just repurposed heavy machinery to find creative ways of defeating an enemy that could not be destroyed by conventional means, Dead Space 3 reveled in the power of the assault rifle. No weapon in the game is anywhere near as effective as just jury-rigging an assault rifle as soon as you have the parts to make one, and mowing down everything in sight with no regard for limbs. In fact, this game cheats in that respect. I was feeling a little weird about the generic zombie enemies that turn into leggy things with tentacles coming out, because I keep on shooting them in the legs, but I must have been missing because they did the torso thing anyway. I went back and looked at the test footage in slow motion, and as you can see here, the game disregards where you're shooting them and just makes it go into its second form anyway. As far as Dead Space goes, that is the biggest slap in the face ever. Yeah, never mind one of the original tenants that built this game. Never mind why you started playing this game in the first place. You're gonna be paired up with off-brand Marcus Phoenix from Gears of War, and you're gonna like it. This is the longest game in the whole Dead Space franchise by a reasonable factor, just by looking at my footage takes alone. But so much of this game is spent dicking around in the bench system and completing minigames that don't make sense given the context of Dead Space. Where the previous 2 games had something of a minigame system where it kind of made sense what you were doing in respect to the environment, the puzzles in Dead Space the third just feel like busy work, like an excuse to have co-op involvement. And just because you can't talk about Dead Space 3 without bringing it up, yep, the scavenger bots, here we go. This takes the textbook definition of bad monetization elements because it goes off a factor where, yeah, you can do this on your own. You can totally just wander around the endless wastes of this planet looking for spots to put your scavenger bots, and you can eventually buy those stupid packages with your ration vouchers or whatever. But if you give us some money, we'll let you do it instantly. Back to that whole, yeah, this is the longest game of the series. So much of this game was made to be a pay-to-skip feature. If you pay the money, you can skip that additional 10 hours of gameplay that's spent just messing around on the bench because you're trying to find the best gun you can make with the scraps you've been given. All the time, the little, hey, pay $2 and we'll give you all the scraps and parts you could ever possibly dream of is staring you in the face, reminding you that you are playing a useless, vestigial piece of game that is only there to attempt to nickel and dime the weak-minded, which, at least in my opinion, because of the kind of game Dead Space is, that does not attract the weak-minded. The weak-minded will play other, more generic, popular games. But never mind that. That's not the biggest issue of Dead Space 3. It's not the, yeah, never mind, we're dude bros with machine guns now. It's not the chest-high wall shooties. It's not even any of that. It's not even that Ellie very much had some work done in the middle of humanity ending to appeal to the Doritos audience that EA forever chases. No. They committed the ultimate sin of putting out a game with Dead Space 3. They hid the true ending of the series behind a full-priced DLC. You had to pay additional money to go and find out what really happens at the very end of Dead Space 3. If you just play the main game without the DLC, you get just cut-off ending. It's like if the Sonic the Hedgehog games made you pay an extra $10 to $20 to find out where Super Sonic and the Chaos Emeralds get involved. It's that bad. It's the ultimate FU. And on top of that, it's so lazy. They reuse one of the original maps, but not in the way that the first Dead Space did. They just add a few new textures and do a few cheap segments that very obviously did not take too much time and power to make. And look at the Brethren Moons. They are so lazily made. You get the idea that this was a rushed job and maybe Visceral's only way to tell us the true denouement of Dead Space. Which brings us to the final step. Dead Space 3 was effectively the end of all things Dead Space. While it was allegedly leaked out that apparently Dead Space's goal was 5 million users and otherwise the series would not go on, which anyone with an inkling of sanity knows that for a game like Dead Space that is effectively impossible, especially considering that BioShock Infinite, a game that had been anticipated for about half a decade, decided to move its date to right by your date. That wasn't happening. But Visceral maybe knew that this was gonna be how it happened, and we got the end of the story. We got the final puzzle pieces of the overall arc. We figured out just who made the original markers. We figured out what happened to create this EarthGov and why, if EarthGov was so all-knowing and totalitarian, that they decided to go after the markers anyway with seemingly no knowledge of the bad they bring. We learned everything. We found out the secrets. We found out just what the end goal of the markers were, just what the convergence event was. We got an ending, we got a denouement, and even if it wasn't a happy ending, we got an ending. And that's a good thing. Because Dead Space was about to go the way of Assassin's Creed. Dead Space was about to become the game that they just bring out on stage year after year, tired and looking as if they haven't seen a bed in a very long time, but one more tour, one more mortgage payment, so that they can continue and someone else can make $1 off their backs. It was already on the wall. They tried to make a crappy Dead Space mobile game. They tried to make a Dead Space game for the Wii, which by calling it a Dead Space game for the Wii, I have described the entire game. Dead Space was potentially fated to become yet another one of those games that was once good, but then just became a victim of infinite sequels and a lack of time to create and a lack of reason to create. But it got to die. EA inadvertently did the nicest thing it could possibly do for the Dead Space franchise. And even now, as Visceral Games rots away, making Battlefield whatever it is, the one that nobody cared about and everyone made fun of because it managed to be the lesser of both Payday and Battlefield, at least they know that Dead Space got an end. Isaac Clarke met his final fate. The Brother Moons fed. Humanity met its demise, and now the universe is comprised entirely of Dead Space. It's over. We never have to worry about cheap sequels. And for that, we should be thankful. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining me on this video. I know it was a long one, but I had a lot of stuff I wanted to talk about. Liking, commenting, and subscribing are always a great way to help, but if you really want to help me make more high quality videos whenever I can, supporting me on Patreon is an excellent way to do this. This video itself, from concept to completion, took somewhere between 70 and 85 hours to do. So if I could possibly get more money from Patreon and on top of the ads and what have you, I might be able to find more time to set aside so I can get these videos out more often to you. Anything any of you can reasonably give will be so appreciated. Thank you. Oh, and just as a side note, coincidentally, after I had done all the writing for this video and stuff, I was going through Game Maker's Toolkit because I really liked them, and I got about 5 minutes into his Dead Space series before I realized, oh, I need to stop right now before I pollute my own findings. And it was funny. Now that this video is finally over, I'm gonna go watch those, so you know where I'll be.